Welcome to Mean Streets, the Film Noir podcast. This is the consulting rooms of Deckard and Booth. We are your cinematic sleuths investigating the best and worst and forgotten movies of film noir. And today's case is none other than the 1946 adaptation of Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep, starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Welcome, Matthew, and welcome myself to episode one. Oh man, I'm excited to kick this off with you, man.
I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be good.
Yeah, we've done numerous shows about film noir on older podcasts of mine, and it just sort of made sense that we should come together and just do a film noir podcast, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It made perfect sense.
Yeah, and like here we are.
It's a shared interest we've got, and we share similar tastes on it. So.
Indeed. For those who don't know us, maybe we should reintroduce ourselves. Matt, why don't you go first?
Well, my name is Matthew Booth. I'm a crime writer. I'm the author of the Everett Carr mysteries, which are Golden Age homages, and also the Alex Priest crime novels, which are influenced by film noir and the private eye novels of people like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. I'm a member of the Crime Writers Association, and I am the editor of its monthly magazine, Red Herrings. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Luke.
So I am also a crime writer. I have a PhD in crime fiction, which is pretty cool. So technically, I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor in the sense like Ross is a doctor in Friends. So if anyone calls for a doctor, it's I'm pretty useless. But I can talk to someone about the themes of noir fiction to someone who's choking from their fish.
It gives them something else to think about.
It does. It's like, don't think about the fishbone in your throat. It's fine. Let's talk about the role of the femme fatale. But yeah, no. So I write crime fiction. I've written some Golden Age stuff in the past. That was Victorian London stuff. And I also write noir fiction, and I've written podcast scripts for true crime podcasts and things like that. With all that said, let's dive into The Big Sleep. I like that we picked this as our first movie. I wanted it to be like a big classic like this. It was kind of between this or the Maltese Falcon, and I'm glad we picked this one. It's been a while since I've seen this movie. I want to say maybe 2 to 3 years since. No, not 2 to 3 years. I can't remember if I watched it when we did one of our initial noir chats. I think I might have just watched the Maltese Falcon, possibly. But it's definitely been at least a year or two since I've seen The Big Sleep. But before we dive into the nitty gritty of what we liked and disliked and all that sort of stuff, what is your general reaction from watching this movie?
It's been a long held favorite of mine since, I don't know, the age of 15, 16, when I must have seen it for the first time. I think it's a brilliant example of what film noir is, but equally, and I come to this very much from the literary side of things as well. So from Chandler's books, which, like all crime fiction adaptations, I always like to go back to the books and say, did you do it justice? And I think this film does in spades, in Sam Spades, as it were.
Sam Spades.
I mean, it does take some liberties with the plot, but that's what adaptation is. It's not always good for an adaptation to be slavish to the original text. But a lot of the dialogue is from the book. A lot of the situations are straight from the book, and it follows the plot. We'll come on to the plot, but it follows the plot very closely. And he's quite a faithful and very reverential adaptation, I think. And it succeeds on its own levels, not just as an adaptation. It succeeds on its own. You could watch the film and not know the book and still have the thrill of a lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I found it to be a very fun noir romp, which maybe that sounds flippant. I don't know. I don't mean it in that way. But for me, I was enjoying it not for the plotting, because there's problems with the plotting for sure. There's also problems with Chandler's plotting as well. So it's not just the movie's fault per se. But I really was captured by the jazziness of the dialogue and the toughness. There are places in the movie where it deviates quite a bit from Chandler's work. I don't necessarily find that to be a problem. I found it interesting because, like you said, adaptations, they take liberties all the time, which is it just kind of goes without saying. So I never went into this movie expecting a wholesale representation of The Big Sleep, the novel. Some of the changes I question, some of them I like. It does try to, I think the film attempts to sort of fix or explain a plot hole in the novel that is not there, but that's something we can talk about. You know, who killed the chauffeur is a big question in the studies of Chandler's work. So overall, I'm like, yeah, this is a fun, gripping film, but there are lots of things to say about it.
It's a thrill ride, and I think one of the things about it is that whilst there are problems with it, and we'll discuss those, it's one of those films where when the end credits roll, you do sort of say, well, I've no idea what that was about, but my God, it was good fun. You know?
Yes.
You know?
Yep.
And you're not really sure. I mean, there's so much going on, so much happening. There's so many moving parts to it that you do have to be on your toes.
Yes.
But in a way, I think that works. And in a way, I think that's the point of it. The books famously are first-person narratives.
Yeah.
And as near as you can on film, I think this is one as well, because we learn things when Marlowe learns, and he's got to take it all on board and try and make sense of it, and so have we. And what I like about this film that modern films don't do so much is it doesn't spoon feed you with anything. It just lets you get on with it.
Yes.
And try and make sense of it. You know, and it's a bit like it. For the first, I watched it last night in readiness for this, and I was struck. It's almost like a sort of David Lynch film. Like Mulholland Drive, you know, where you've no real idea what's going on, but the film is just saying, well, you decide, you know, you make of it what you will, sort of thing. That's part of the fun.
Yeah,
and that's more engaging to me in a way than just a film that tells you who did it, where, and when.
I mean, noir fiction, as in hard-boiled fiction, anyway, is always complicated when you're talking about plots. I mean, Raymond Chandler famously said that it's all about, for him, writing these things, these stories was all about style, and not so much about like this watertight plot. And a lot of noir fiction, whether that's like in novels or even cinematic film noir, you find that there's, I can't remember who said it, but you essentially go out and you just start knocking on doors, or you're shaking trees to see what falls, and then you kind of go from there. So plotting with some of this stuff is very complicated, and it's just why I don't come down too hard on The Big Sleep for its plot issues, because the noir fiction is all about, well, I've shaken this tree and this is what's fallen. Well, I'll follow this lead for a while and see where that goes, and then that lead leads to some crime and mystery, and it just sort of builds like that. And there's no sort of, I don't know, kind of big bad twirling their mustache at the end that they need to sort of fight. It's you have all these little episodic adventures along the way, and then eventually you get back to the beginning, and it sort of all wraps itself up, not always in a neat bow, but everything is sort of wrapped up a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean about you're following Marlowe. You're in Marlowe's position, the same position as he is. Not necessarily in his shoes, but you're in the same position that he is, in the sense that he's also he doesn't know when he starts investigating it, whatever it is he's investigating, what the right leads are and what the right trail is. He makes mistakes, he gets lost, and one thing will lead into something else, which will lead into something else, which will then get him on the right track. And that is very much what noir fiction does,
and I love
novels do. And this film, like you're right, Chandler was all about style, and this is the cinematic equivalent, because it's all about atmosphere.
Definitely,
it's about the atmosphere and the dialogue, which is the film version of what Chandler's books are about. They're about the style and the dialogue and the pace. They both share the pace.
Yes, they do.
Because I
They
think
do.
this film is a pacey film, and it's just short of 2 hours, but it rattles along at breakneck speed.
Yeah, you don't feel the 2 hours. You don't feel the 2 hours. I mean, I've watched films that are far shorter that I'm like, "Oh my god, please end. Please end."
Yeah,
But this one, for being 2 hours and for the amount of stuff that happens or doesn't happen, you are glued to the screen and you're glued to the characters and the actors and what they're doing. It's a very gripping film from start to finish.
it is, and I think it's gripping in a number of ways. I think it's gripping in terms of the performances. I think it's gripping in terms of the atmosphere. And I think it's gripping in terms of the part of the plot that you're being asked to consider at that specific time.
Yes.
As an overall picture, it might be confusing, but the scenes themselves,
Yeah.
make sense. And
Yeah.
for the time that you're in that scene, say it's the scene with Joe Brody, you are captivated by those performances and by what happens next. In that sense, it is a really gripping piece. As an ensemble piece of filmmaking, it really is gripping.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think it'd be fun to talk about the people behind the film before we dive more into it, because there's kind of an impressive army of talent behind this movie that I think some people might not realize. So Howard Hawks is the director, which I found out he's actually from Indiana, which is my home state, which is pretty cool. So I can claim him. But he did a bunch of notable films. Like he did the original. He did a film called Scarface. It's not the one you're probably thinking if you're listening. It's another one that's much older than the one that you're thinking about. But he did Scarface. Only Angels Have Wings. His Girl Friday. To Have and Have Not. The Big Sleep. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Rio Bravo. He worked with Bacall. He made Bacall a star into Have and Have Not. He worked with Cary Grant on a couple of films. Like, he added a lot to cinema in his time. What do you think about Hawks in general as the director behind this?
It's a film which is so evidently his, and it's so obviously his. It's got all his sort of artistic clout behind it.
Yeah.
And it's as much a Howard Hawks film as it is a Raymond Chandler film or a Philip Marlowe film.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I think a good director, you can always tell. You can always tell a Hitchcock when you see one. And you can always tell a Scorsese when you see one.
Yeah.
I mean, to some extent, you can always tell a Spielberg when you see one.
Yeah.
And I think you can always tell a Howard Hawks when you see one. And this is, and some of the choices he made. I mean, he did make Bacall. And what works so well in this film is the teaming of Bogart and Bacall. It's as much a Bogart Bacall vehicle as it is a Philip Marlowe crime film or a Raymond Chandler adaptation. And Hawks knew that, and Hawks was sensible enough to know that he had dynamite on his hands, because To Have and Have Not approved it. Yeah. And we might talk a bit more about this later, but the film was delayed. And it was delayed partly because they reshot some scenes with Bogart and Bacall to make more of their then famous love affair.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's that was part. Well, it was actually the delay was due to the studio wanting to release all of their war films at the time, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So they had a bunch of war films. I found this so interesting. They had a bunch of war films because the Second World War just ended. And they were like, okay, we got a bunch of war films. We need to get this shit out now because people are going to lose interest and we don't want to be releasing this stuff later. We got to do it now. So that's the initial reason why they delayed the film, which then led to some very interesting changes to the movie that I do want to get into, but maybe just a little later. But you're right, though.
It's Hawks that seizes that opportunity and says, right, well, we can make this better than it was.
Yes.
By cashing in. I mean, that's the modern phrase for it, isn't it? Well, cashing in on the popularity of Bogart and Bacall, not only from To Have and To Have Not, but also that. I mean, Bogart was a big star, so his love life, as is still the case today, sold papers.
Yes.
So Bacall was, I don't know, 25 years younger than he was or something. So
very young. Yes.
it will have been dynamite news.
Yeah.
And Hawks is clever enough to say, well, we'll use this.
Yes.
We'll use this delay.
Yes.
To make this film even more of a success, almost a guaranteed success when it comes out.
Yes.
That's a savvy director, that is.
It is, because there's moments, I'll get this a bit later, but I don't want to lose this thought, but there's moments in there where, Bogart and Bacall are really playing incredibly well off each other and have a really unique chemistry that I think really comes from their romantic relationship. And you can absolutely tell that Hawks is playing to that. And it's interesting. And I don't have any evidence to back this next claim up, so this is all just my own speculation. But I remember there's a scene in BBC Sherlock. I think it's series 3, maybe 3 or 4. I think it's in 4, maybe, when Mary is about to die, and Martin Freeman, who plays Watson, is playing off Amanda Abington, who was his then wife, who played Mary Morstan. And you could tell. I feel like Stephen Moffat and the directors of Sherlock were also probably playing off the fact that they weren't in a good relationship at the time, and their relationship was falling apart. And then you have this scene where his fictional relationship is also falling apart, and I'm like, there's moments. I think Big Sleep Hawks definitely played into that, and you can see other directors do that from time to time if you have a bit of background information to what's going on. Because I mean, Bacall her breakout role was the To Have and Have Not, which is in 1944. Bogart was obviously a household name. He was his breakout role was High Sierra in 1941. But he had already starred as one of the other pinnacle private eyes, Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon. So he's done like the 2 biggest private eyes in literary history.
Which is like, because he started, I mean, his early films in things like Angels with Dirty Faces and things like that, he was often a gangster. So he's been on both sides of the law. He's sort of earned his stripes as a criminal before he becomes pretty much, I would say, the embodiment of 2 of the most famous, most iconic private eyes in all of literature.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. What about the writers of the film? I'm also quite interested in some of these writers. Do you want to take this first?
Lee Brackett is the one that really springs to my mind.
Yes, me too.
Who, amazing. Is it amazing? I think it's amazingly. It was the writer of The Empire Strikes Back, which is just sort of a million miles from this.
Yes.
But she's also, and this is a film we might perhaps cover on another episode, but she's also the screenwriter for the Altman's Long Goodbye. Yes. So she's sort of, this is a sort of Marlowe dress rehearsal, I suppose.
Yeah.
But there's a famous story, I think it's a famous story, of Bogart saying some of these lines aren't tough enough. Marlowe's tougher than this. I want them rewritten. And he said, I suppose she wrote them. And it turned out that she didn't at all. She wrote the toughest ones. And that sort of put Bogart in his place a little bit. I think you can see by watching other films that she's written, you can see the bits that she was responsible for. And I think that the way they went about it, the sort of method they went about, was to say, well, we'll adapt alternate chapters of the book. I don't know how sort of successfully that can be done, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the film's problem, actually, is because you have William Faulkner, the very famous author, who's the author of Sound and Fury and As I Lie Dying and other things. He wrote literally 50 films. But it's interesting because he also worked with Hawks on To Have and Have Not and other work. So he's kind of part of his Hawks arsenal. But I think the alternating thing demonstrates some of the problems with the plot and some of the inconsistencies with character and whatnot, because that if you're going to alternate it, I'm like, okay, you then need a third person to come in and even out the seams a little bit. And they did have Jules Furtherman, but he was there mostly doing rewrites with Altman on set, rather than he didn't do like a whole set. He didn't like take the whole script himself. It was kind of there on the spot sort of thing. But yeah, so I think the alternating thing is an interesting way to go about it, because talking about reshoots, talking about the way this film is written, it's a recipe for disaster.
It is a recipe for disaster. It certainly is. I think you need to have much more. I mean, a similar problem arises when Chandler himself is adapting Double Indemnity with Billy Wilder. And I think it also happens when Chandler's doing Strangers on a Train for Hitchcock. Yeah. And this sort of collaborative, I mean, it does work. We know it works because plenty of films
worked. Yeah, it's a miracle that it worked, but it did.
But this collaborative, I think you've got to be very stern with yourself and disciplined with each other.
Yeah,
and really, you've got to have an agreed vision. And
yeah,
I agree. I'm not so sure that there was, and I think that does tend to sort of filter in and leak into some of the scenes.
Yeah,
it's just an occasional jarring quality to some of the writing, but overall, I think it's a fabulous script. Overall, some of the stuff goes on a little bit too long. Some of the there's that very famous scene where it's about they're flirting with each other, Bogart and Bacall, and it's all about horse racing. And
yes,
I like to be in the saddle early or whatever it is, and I think, oh come on, this is going on a bit too long now. I get it,
Yeah.
They're obviously, the script writers are obviously enjoying themselves. Bogart and Bacall are obviously enjoying themselves.
Yes.
But I stop enjoying myself about 4 lines in.
Yes.
Because it all sounds too much bit like a Roger Moore Bond film.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's definitely
the bad puns, really.
Yes.
When you've got some of Chandler's best one-liners in the script.
Yeah.
It really does jar to me.
Yeah.
So I think there's some element of that which, you could have lost some of those puns and some of those metaphors.
I totally agree. Absolutely. I'd have to kind of second the Lee Blackett stuff, because I found her the most interesting part of the trio of writers. Mainly because, like you said, she worked on drafts of The Empire Strikes Back, wrote The Long Goodbye with that started Elliot Gould. But the other thing that was interesting is she obviously she's a big science fiction writer as well, but she did also write crime fiction. She wrote a book that was Chandler-esque called No Good from a Corpse. And
did she not write that as a result of this script? I think she enjoyed doing this so much that she wrote that.
Possibly. I can't remember the date that the book came out.
I wouldn't want to be quoted on that, but I'm sure I've read somewhere that she enjoyed the genre so much.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
She had to go doing it herself. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can get the book. It is available. Ebooks are available. Hard copies are roughly available. But I did the ebook, and I was reading some of it, and it's funny that you made that talking about the story about Bogart saying like, "Oh, did she write these soft lines?"
Yeah.
Because the opening of the book is you can see that I think she's probably the one responsible for some of the most witty repartee in there, because the opening chapter in her book takes place between the kind of a snotty PI and this woman, and just the way they're going back and forth. I'm like, I can so see how this was also in The Big Sleep, and how you were probably the one who wrote this stuff. Probably wasn't William Faulkner.
No, I don't think it was Faulkner. I mean, I don't know. I can't give a ratio of who did what.
I'd love to see that.
I would not be surprised to learn that Brackett did 90% of it.
Yeah, I would love to see a version of the script that like highlights who wrote what.
Who did what. Yeah,
that would be would be because fantastic.
I think her Long Goodbye script is available online.
I'll have to check that out. Didn't know that.
And again, you can tell from that she's got a firm handle what noir is and what tough law enforcement people are like, and what gangsters are like.
And I think what's also so interesting about this is like, okay, this is like 1946 film, and one of its main writers is a woman. Because we live in an age today where like there's a lot of controversy about you know, who has a place at the table, all that sort of stuff. And we sort of tend to forget that we also need to look back at some of the big wins. And it's like, you've got this epic classic movie that one of its primary writers was a woman. Like, that's a win. And we like stuff like that. We need to go back and like celebrate, you know, and like, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like, this is a slight detour, but like it reminds me of when Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura in Star Trek, was contemplating leaving the show. And Martin Luther King was like, you need to stay. And she's like, why? And he's like, basically saying, you're at the table. It's important for people to see you there. And it's huge. And I think, you know, this is another one of those instances where it's like, we spend so much time like complaining and arguing and back and forth stuff with pop culture things and all that kind of stuff, where it's like, the arguments still need to be had because there's you know, always room for improvement. But I'm like, come on, like, we also got to look back at, like, this is back in the 40s. Like, this is a serious cool achievement, in my opinion.
And of course, she was right. She's writing, taking this film, she's writing something which is so fundamentally masculine.
Yeah.
And she's wiping the floor with them all.
Definitely.
Because the script crackles, and I am in no doubt it's down to her. Because you only have to look at the Empire Strikes Back script. That generally, that one comes out on top as being the best of all of them.
Yeah, definitely.
And you know, even as a kid, you could watch Star Wars and think, my God, some of that was pretty ropey dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
But there's a marked difference when you get to the Empire Strikes Back. The whole thing is more adult. The whole thing has got more depth. It's got more texture. It's got more subtlety, and it's got layers. Princess layers. And that's down to her. And you know, and I think her contribution can't be underestimated. Certainly in Star Wars, and certainly in this. Yeah. And some of the things that they get in this script, which are from the book, that they got past the censors, is brilliant. And that's down to good writing. That's not just down to sort of you know, saying, well, it was in the book, we've got to have it in the film or anything like that. That's down to good writing so that the censors don't notice it.
Yes, yeah, and there's stuff they couldn't get past the censors, but that's again.
We'll come on to that. Yeah,
we can talk about that. The last thing about the kind of the people behind the film is also, it's really worth mentioning the composer, because it's Max Steiner. If you don't know, I mean, he's according to his IMDb and whatnot, he's written or composed over 300 movie scores, but one of the biggest things was that he did the King Kong movie in 1933. Him doing that score for King Kong was a big change in film history, film music history, because it's the first feature length musical score that was written for for the talkies, you know. So you also have this kind of powerhouse composer. It'd be like comparing like today, it'd be like having someone like big, like a Hans Zimmer or someone like that, you know. Doing your score, like having someone like him, this is a big dude doing this, and the score is great.
The score is fabulous.
Yeah, like the way it flows, it hits in all the right places. Like it's a perfect score, I'd say.
It is, and it's very much of its time. All in a lot of these films, the music is almost there throughout, but sometimes it's so subtle you don't notice it. Yeah. But what I like about this score is that it follows Marlowe's mind. There are scenes where he's confused, and the score is confused. Then he has an idea, and the score picks up. Yeah. He finds a clue when he finds the camera, the film missing from the camera in Geiger's house. He's surprised by it. He's befuddled by it, and the score reflects that. Yeah. And when he's at his lowest, the score is quite depressing. So it follows him, and that's an amazing. I think that's a really impressive feat. The music isn't there just to provide a soundtrack; it's there to inform the character and the plot.
Yeah, and another very famous noir movie that does that is Blade Runner. Vangelis does that with Deckard's character the whole time. He's like, it's interesting that sort of, they have that, the kind of that shared connective tissue of their scores sort of responding to the actors in a very interesting way. It's not just sort of general. It's not just generic music. It's in the way that like Vangelis' score or other movies like Lord of the Rings, like it's almost a character in and of itself, kind of hanging out there in the background. Which
and if you look at some of the other films this time, I mean, Frank Skinner's score for the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes films at Universal, that music crops up in almost every Universal horror film as well.
Yeah,
and in different circumstances, in completely different situations. It's just well, we need a bit of music here, so throw that in.
Yes,
this is quite different. This is a well thought out, perfectly cued score.
Yeah.
And it's obvious that Steiner had watched the film, understood the film as far as anybody can.
Yeah.
And knew that dramatically he needed to do A, B, and C, and goes off and creates the score that does exactly what he wants it to do.
Yeah.
And it flows with the story, flows with the characters. It's a brilliant score.
Yeah, I love it. I think the other thing that's quite interesting before we get into like starting about like what we like and things we disliked about the movie is the status of film noir at the time. I mean, the term film noir did not exist at this point. It was beginning to exist in France. France were, French people were the kind of the ones who were watching American movies at that time after the war, because they obviously being occupied by Nazi Germany, American films were not there. But once they started getting them, the French viewers and reviewers were noticing all of the movies having a lot of movies having this sort of like disillusioned attitude, this sort of darkness, this sort of grimness, and that's they basically pioneered the concept of film noir for American movies, which is funny. And it took American film critics and students up until about the 60s for it to finally click. But what's also to me, it's what really interesting about film noir is, despite some of these movies like The Big Sleep being big and The Maltese Falcon being big, generally film noir, these crime movies were essentially just labeled as B movies. The studios weren't interested in them. They were just churning them out, really. And there's a part of me that's kind of like, that's interesting, because we kind of have that. The attitude, it's almost like kind of a reverse attitude, where like, nowadays comic book movies are the big cheese, but now they just churn them out so much that they're all quite crap. And I'm like, what will the attitude to some of these films be in 30 years from now, when we're very distant and looking back at them? Will we reevaluate some of them and be a bit more kind to some of them? But it is interesting to me that at this time film noir is kind of this trashy genre.
Absolutely. Yeah And it happens all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah,
people don't know when you've got it, you don't know how good it is,
right?
And you throw it out as a B movie, and then someone 10, 15 years later says what a work of genius it is. And some producers either say, oh, well, we always knew it was. And some say, really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of reflected in crime fiction, isn't it? That there is a literary snobbery about crime fiction, which is why you don't get, crime novels winning the Booker Prize. Not yet, anyway. I think some of that snobbery is diluting a little bit, but it's taken a long time. And I think it's a similar sort of snobbery, that these are just crime films, because there had been that during the Second World War, there had been all those B movies, including the Rathbone Holmes films, and the cheaply made gangster flicks, that had served as a bit of escapism, where the good guys won and the bad guys were shot down. And I think there's an element of that sort of hanging over, because, like as you said before, the war films were what people were really wanting to see, and romances, Gone with the Wind and all those sort of things. So that the crime film was always a little bit of the poor cousin
Yeah.
So that when something like this comes along, and 5 years earlier, the Maltese Falcon had come along,
Mm.
I think it's easy to understand why they perhaps were dismissed,
Mm.
but it's far easier to understand why they were wrongly dismissed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think so.
I mean, there's so much going on in these films. In film noirs generally, there's so
Yeah.
much going on about not just right and wrong, good and evil, and all that, but about human beings and about what they do and why they do things to each other,
Yeah.
and the world they live in, and how their impact on the world they live in then affects both the world and themselves. And there's a lot going on in film noir that you don't get in your average sort of, I don't know, Western or something. I don't, you know what I mean?
Oh God, no.
There's a lot going on that
Yeah.
makes these films, the ones that we'll look at,
Yeah.
in the heyday of film noir, far more than just a cop shooting a robber.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at, like, you mentioned, like, the literature itself, like Chandler's books, Dashiell Hammett's, people, Ross McDonald, well, not Ross McDonald, but kind of Ross McDonald, even Mickey Spillane a little bit. But basically what was hard-boiled fiction that then, as it adapts into film, became film noir? What was it responding to? And it's responding to the initially responding to the atrocities of early hard-boiled fiction. You can see responding to World War One, but the big boom of it really happens after World War Two, and that's where you get a lot of, because the Big Sleep came out 1939, so America hadn't even entered this, the Second World War was not ramped up to its where it gets in a couple of years time. But yeah, like, by the time these films are coming out and by the time more books are coming out, we've lived through, the West has lived through that war. I mean, it's that loss of life, that disillusionment, that there's a really they're not famous, but there's a really good short story by Dashiell Hammett, who also wrote The Maltese Falcon, which the film versions, like we said, starred Humphrey Bogart as well. This is really interesting short story where this guy wants to get revenge on a big corporate guy who made a lot of money, I think, like, selling weapons or selling parts that then went to the war effort. And the guy wants revenge. Is that he was a soldier. He's like, I was sitting in the gutter with a bunch of dead bodies, and this guy's, now I'm back here and I have no money and I'm poor and I'm almost homeless and I'm destitute. Well, this guy's up here in his ivory tower sipping champagne. Like, screw
Absolutely.
that. And that frustration that is permeates hard-boiled fiction and permeates film noir, and you see it here as well, in The Big Sleep, because you also see it in the way that society is starting to change. I mean, the opening scene with General Sternwood and Marlowe discussing Sternwood's daughters is really emphasizing the changing relationship and beginning freedom that women are beginning to have, sexually and all that sort of stuff.
And Sternwood himself is sort of a metaphor for that past,
the old world
system, the old guard, falling away and making way for people like Marlowe, who aren't going to abide by the rules necessarily. One of the first things Marlowe says is that he was fired for insubordination.
Yeah.
And which is straight out of the book.
Yeah.
But he's saying it to a man who is obviously representative of social order and hierarchy, and part of the elite. He lives in a massive house, and he's loaded, but he's dying. And there's very much that feeling of the past is going because the world is changing, and it's leaving behind the fast women like Carmen and Vivian and the anti-heroes, if that's the right word, the tarnished heroes of Marlowe, and then set against those the people like Eddie Mars and Joe Brody who are out for what they can get.
Yeah.
Whereas so the world has become is a world of chaos. The world of the big sleep is a world of chaos.
Yeah.
Because that's what was left after the war. There was a time when people said after the war, well, what do we do now?
Yeah,
where do we go from here? We've won, but at what cost?
Exactly.
And very often in film noir, people came back from the war, certainly in this country, came back from the war and were just abandoned. No job, no. They weren't welcome back as the heroes they thought they were going to be welcomed back as. They were just left to survive.
Yeah.
And in film noir, what you often get is that grifter. The like the bloke in The Postman Always Rings Twice, who's going from town to town.
Yeah.
Trying to earn a book. You know, and that's a very real representation of a portion of society.
Yeah.
And what's good about film noir is that those people can then find themselves in situations where they might have to do something bad.
Yes.
So that the innocent man who is just trying to find a job at a gas station can get roped into murder.
Yeah.
Like the garage owner at the end of The Big Sleep. He's obviously there. So at some point, his life has gone sour because he's trying to make a living, but Canino's come and is in total control of him.
Yeah. It's true. Okay, so let's dive into things that we kind of already been going there, but things that we liked about the movie, because there's quite a bit, I think. But one thing that I really like in general is I think it does have a really strong cast. There's a couple of people who are not so strong, but I'll get into that later. But in general, I think Bogart as Marlowe is really good. I think he's probably the standout of everyone in the film, which is probably a good thing given that he's your lead. But I just think he's so cool and so suave the whole time. And I think he embodies Marlowe really, really well. Just the way he kind of laughs at every single person who points a gun at him. And makes fun and makes jokes every time that happens.
So many guns and so few brains.
Yeah, like he doesn't react in this like scared way. He's obviously, he's this in terms of like the hyper fantasy. He's kind of like this hyper masculine hero where like a gun, this deadly gun doesn't scare him. But I really loved his performance, the way he sort of moved in and out of scenes, when he goes into Geiger's store and kind of effortlessly puts on this disguise that it's just everything that's on him. It's sunglasses and his hat and his flap, the front of his hat. Yeah. In his like slight change of register in his voice, that kind of stuff. I love the way he played this stuff. And I just felt that he really connected with every single actor that he came across. There was some sizzle, whether it's that like brief moment with the cab driver, or it's Bacall, or it's Sternwood. There's chemistry happening between every single person in this film.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what I believe that he's a man doing a job, and I believe that the people like Bernie Olds, I believe he knows him from long before. And it's the way Bogart sells that. Too often. Yeah, you're just sort of asked to accept that the private eye and the policeman know each other and rub each other up the wrong way. Yeah, but you can see a genuine sort of friendship between Olds and Marlowe. There's a scene in Olds' office where Marlowe says, "I'm going for some breakfast. Do you want a cup of coffee?" And he says, "Best I'm not seeing with you these days." Yeah, and that sort of banter, and it's all sold primarily by Bogart and his delivery. Yeah, which is brilliant. I mean, he's one of those actors, Humphrey Bogart, for me, who is first and foremost, he's Humphrey Bogart. He's not like a chameleon, is he? He's not like a sort of I don't know, an Anthony Hopkins, say. But But that aside, what he does is very clever with Marlowe, because it would be so easy for him to do a carbon copy of Sam Spade and to say these are the same people in all but name, and they're not. They're very, very different characters. Yeah. And he plays Marlowe. There's a softer edge to his Marlowe. than there is to Spade, as there is in the books.
Yeah.
And he's very good at getting that across, is Bogart.
Yeah.
And notoriously he was short. So he's wearing lifts in his shoes. And there are a few too many scenes of Lauren Bacall sort of sitting down in a car like this. And all the women are in flat shoes most of the time. And that's because of his height. But what I admire about it is, in the novel, Carmen says to Marlowe, "You're very tall, aren't you?" And he says, "I didn't mean to be."
Yes.
Here, they reverse it, and she says, "You're not very tall, are you?" And he says, "I try to be." And I think you've got to give a short actor credit.
Yeah.
Because it's not the only time somebody mentions his height, you know.
Yeah.
And later on she says, "You're a mess, aren't you?" Vivian says, "You're a mess," and he says, "I'm not very tall either."
Yes.
And I think that's a very, very brave thing for a tough guy actor to do.
Yeah.
And it all adds to the charm. And I think in the context of this film, I don't say he's the best Marlowe of all, but in the context of this film, he's the ideal choice for the Marlowe they wanted to present. The sort of adaptation of Marlowe they wanted to present.
Yeah.
And Chandler was a fan of the performance.
Yes. Yeah.
Chandler thought it was good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what more do you need?
I know, right? At least it's.
I've got a quote here. He said, "Bogart can be tough without a gun. Also, he has a sense of humor that contains that grating undertone of contempt."
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that is absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think he was, for what that film was and is, his casting is really smart. And there is that problem. It's like, he was just Sam Spade a couple years ago. Is he going to get typecast as he's always the private eye? But watching those films back to back, they are completely different. What he brings to Marlowe is very different to what he brings to Sam Spade.
It's a completely different. It's a tonal shift from the Sam Spade performance.
Yeah.
Because again, he's being true to the character in the books. Because Sam Spade is much more aggressive, much more abrasive than Marlowe is. Marlowe is a much more laconic, much more romantic character than Spade is. Yes. Spade is as dirty as they come, and tough as they come. And probably far closer to what a private eye really, really would be like, I suspect.
Yes.
Marlowe is the ideal.
Yeah.
And Bogart gets that. There's a scene in Geiger's house where he's Eddie Mars has got a gun on him, and he's just sitting with his legs crossed, totally unfazed.
Yeah.
And yet, when he goes to the garage at the end, pretends he's got a flat tire and has crashed. When he sees Canino, there's a mid shot of Bogart, and his expression is it's fear. It's full of fear. And I like that, because he's a tough guy, but he's not Superman.
Yeah.
And Bogart brings that vulnerability that Marlowe must have. I think Marlowe must have.
Yeah.
Because Marlowe knows he's the only one that's going to walk into a room and get his head kicked in on behalf of somebody else for $10 a day.
Yes.
He doesn't enjoy his work, I don't think, whereas I suspect Spade does. And Bogart gets that. Bogart conveys that as well. I think it's a mesmeric performance.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. It is one of the things that I really like about this film. It really is what makes the film. It would be interesting, to go to another universe and see this film with a different actor in that role and see if it still holds up as well. Because I don't know if it would. Because
I think you'd have to recast the whole thing.
Possibly.
Because I think what I mean, if let's just say we took Dick Powell, who'd done Murder My Sweet a couple of years before. Powell against Bacall would have been a disaster.
Yes.
So I think you would have had to get rid of her as well. What makes this sizzle is Bogart and Bacall.
Yeah.
And that chemistry that they've got.
Yeah.
But that chemistry is also sort of reshaped and applied to somebody else that Bogart has equal electricity with.
Yeah.
The scenes with Sternwood, the scenes with Joe Brody. That whole sequence in Brody's apartment
Yes.
is like it's like watching a ballet. It's so well choreographed. It's brilliant,
Yeah.
and it's Bogart that carries that through.
Definitely.
Passing these lines of dialogue as so quickly that you believe that they've just occurred to him. These one-liners have just occurred to him.
Yeah.
So when he says, get up, darling, you look like a Pekingese, he doesn't say it like a scripted line, whereas some actors sound like they're reciting a script.
Yeah. Like imagine like a Ryan Reynolds in that role. It's like, okay, that's just a scripted line of you trying to be funny.
It's all very organic with Bogart, and I like the fact that he's indecisive and he doesn't really know. Sometimes he doesn't know what to do for the best, so he just does something and sees what happens.
Yes. That's that thing we're talking about. That's sort of like shaking trees and just to see. What falls. Yeah, he really, really does that quite a bit.
And I enjoy the quiet moments he has when he's sitting in his car just waiting.
Yes.
He's outside Geiger's house just waiting for something to happen.
Yes.
Because, let's face it, isn't that what private detectives do?
Exactly. I love that. What are some of the other, like, your favorite things about this movie? Give me a couple more.
Well, I love the whole atmosphere of it. I love the whole way it's shot. I love the cinematography.
Yeah.
I love the overall tone. I love the fact that, by and large, the villains are dressed in black and Marlowe's dressed in grey because he's a bit of both. He's not got the white hat on because he's not an out-and-out hero. But the way they're lit, their faces are all bright white.
Yeah.
I love all that attention to detail. I like the fact that it's not overwhelmed by what can I call them, the film noir trappings.
Sure.
So you know what I mean? The things like all that German expressionism. So camera angles and starting in shadow and only being illuminated by the flick of a match. I love the fact there's no voiceover, which is a real film noir trope, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that there's no voiceover because I think that detracts from the spontaneity of it and the idea I was talking about before that you're learning with Marlowe. If Marlowe said Mars walked into the apartment and I knew straight away he was a crook, you'd lose something fundamental. I think some of the lighting is absolutely incredible. That the whole scene where he's waiting at Geiger's house and that whole set piece in the pouring rain, it puts Seven to shame, the amount of rain that is pouring down. And I love the whole end sequence from the minute he crashes his car at is he called Art Hook or something?
Something like that, yeah.
The minute he crashes his car there, or pretends to crash his car there, the lighting in that confrontation in that garage is absolutely, it's film noir to its core. Because that is dark and dingy and dangerous. Yeah. And the lighting is all on Marlowe's face.
Yeah. I'm with you. I love that stuff as well. I also just love in general, like the sets. I think the sets are really well done. Like Marlowe's office, there's like a picture of a boxer behind him. You kind of you get these like sense of like who he is and like the sense of toughness. Just by looking at
after he's been beaten up and he flops, he's cleaning himself up at the sink and then flops down in that armchair. It's a grotty leather armchair. And you think that's where he's like, that's where he goes when he just wants to have a bit of peace. And that chair looks lived in. It looks like an old friend. All that is brilliant.
And then you contrast that with like the Sternwood house, and there's a particular room that we revisit a couple of times where we first meet Lauren Bacall, her character Vivian, and then where Marlowe brings Carmen back to as well. And it's this elegant, bright white room with this lush bed, and and it's just so fun going from all these different like these hotel rooms to his little office to his little house. And I love the way the world felt. It felt lived in where it needed to feel lived in, and then felt lavish in all the right places, but in this almost like a seedy lavish. I mean, like the scene where they go to where Marlowe visits that bar where they play some poker or whatever. That's just kind of teeming with seediness. Even though it's flashy, you have these beautiful waitresses walking around the room, catching everyone's eyes, but you just know there's this seediness just right underneath the surface of all this sheen. And
he says something like, Eddie Marr says, go out this way, and he says, no, I'll go out the front with the other suckers. It's just brilliant, and the fact that it's all a soundstage. I don't think there's any location shots at all, and
I don't think so.
Outside Geiger's house again, on that road going up to the garage, it doesn't look like a soundstage.
Yeah, it looks
because
great.
of its light, because of the lighting, and because of how involved you are in the story. You don't say this is a set.
Yeah,
and you can tell it's a set.
Yeah,
I believe I'm in the Los Angeles outskirts. I'm absolutely believing it.
Yeah.
And that's all to do with the composition of the scene and the lighting, the camera angles, and everything is designed to make you believe in the world that you are being asked to enter.
Yeah.
And I agree about the Sternwood house and the ostensibly plush club that really is full of gamblers and drunkards. That's one of the things I love about private eye literature and about film noir and hard-boiled stuff, that it isn't just a drawing room in a country house. You see life from the gutter to the castles in the sky and everything in between, and Marlowe has to operate on every level of that society and adapt himself accordingly, and this film has all that.
Now, what's interesting is, I mean, because that's I think we've sort of like capped off a lot of stuff we love. I mean, we've been going. There's a lot of stuff that we love. This film is a generally pretty good movie, but there's also some interesting things that I think a lot of people don't know, and that is, we've alluded to it earlier, but that there are two cuts of this movie. There's a 1945 cut, which is the original one, and then a 1946 cut. The 1945 cut was found just like someone discovered it in the I don't know.
I think you can get it as an extra on is it the Blu-ray now or
something like that?
Whichever version it is.
But it's really interesting because we talked about earlier in that this film was they did some reshoots to amp up the Bacall Bogart chemistry, and that's because the film came out. And then, or they did their initial cut of it, and I think some of that initial cut was maybe sent to soldiers or something like that. Maybe they found a cut that had gone to people
it went to servicemen.
That was it. And so while people were waiting for the real release to come out, that's when they decided to do some reshoots. And what's interesting is they trimmed down Carmen's role. In this in this film, which is a part of me kind of feels like that's a little bit of a shame. I'm like, I remember when I was watching the film, I kept thinking I need a little bit more of her. She feels a little underused, and then I kept thinking there were times where Bogart and Bacall were sort of stealing scenes, but it just kind of went on a little bit too long. So Absolutely. It was interesting to then go back and find out that, well, actually there was a bunch of Carmen stuff that they trimmed down that Chandler actually liked.
He did.
Chandler liked the original cuts, and he liked Martha Vickers, who plays Carmen. He liked her performance and felt that it overshadowed Bacall's Vivian, which is interesting. So that's part of the reason why they decided to trim it down, because Bacall is this big star now, and they want to bank off this Bogart Bacall back and forth, and I mean they both get equal billing in the movie, which is interesting.
That's one of the things you were saying before about Lee Brackett, the fact that Bacall's got equal top billing.
Yeah.
She could easily have been a supporting artist, or labeled as listed as a supporting artist. But
Absolutely.
She shares top billing with him, which again is a bonus. But you're right about the Carmen cuts, and you're also right about the fact that there was a real fear that Martha Vickers was going to eat every scene that she was in, and that Bacall would then be relegated. So they cut her out, and one of the things that they cut out was a collection of scenes which would have clarified Marlowe's discoveries, and it would have clarified Carmen's involvement very much along the lines of the book.
Yes.
Which in the 46 version, which I think is the version everybody else will have seen.
That is the main one, definitely.
That's the main one.
Yeah.
Carmen's sort of involvement in it and her culpability in it all is dismissed in a couple of lines.
Yes. And
I think that is to the film's detriment. I really do.
I agree.
I'd like to, it'd be nice to see a sort of director's cut, I suppose.
Yeah.
Of not necessarily the 44 cut, but an amalgamation of the two, like a sort of Richard Donner Superman 2.
Yes, cut. That could be fun.
Because I think that would be good, and because Martha Vickers is sensational. She's absolutely brilliant in it, and she's the Carmen of the book. For me, she's the Carmen of the book down to a T. And it would have been and the scene where she confronts Brody again in that balletic apartment scene. I mean, she's very good in that,
yes.
and there are scenes where Bacall is a bit ropey.
Yes. Oh God.
To be fair to Bacall, she's young, she's nervous. She admits she was nervous. She's untrained, largely untrained.
Yes.
And she's been elevated to a star.
Yes.
Perhaps before she'd got the acting chops and to back it up.
Yeah.
That said,
it's not unlike Sean Young against Harrison Ford in Blade Runner.
Absolutely, yeah, it is. And that's
I think Sean Young did a better job.
she does, but I mean, Bacall's not awful.
No, she's not.
But there are some scenes where you can tell she's struggling.
Yeah, she did get panned. There was a film that came out before this one, and between Have and Have Not, where people panned her acting.
Yeah,
critics didn't like her.
Yeah, was that called Confidential Agent or something?
Yes.
Something like that. I might not have that right, but something like that.
No, that's right. That's right.
And I think she was. I don't think she was still smarting from that. So, but there are some elements. She's at her best when she's with Bogart, obviously, because he's obviously helping her out. Having been told that he wasn't allowed to drink anymore because he was getting wasted at lunchtime.
Yes.
So Hawks limited him to one beer a day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those cut scenes would have done a lot. I think to improve the film, and they would have made it easy to follow. They would have showcased Martha Vickers, because I don't think her career didn't really do much. I don't think.
Yeah,
I'm not saying this is cause and effect, but I think she would have had a better career if they'd allowed her to showcase a bit in The Big Sleep.
I think so too, and it's also interesting because there's those were interesting things that were happening, kind of that kind of sparked the some of the rewrites, but also there were also elements of the writing that I think also didn't help the film out a little bit, and that is mainly because they had to appease what's called the Hays Office, which is the motion picture code. And so basically they were stern about making sure that there were almost no sexual themes in the movie. And so in the original book, Geiger is a gay man, but they completely remove any of that. When Marlowe, again in the book, when Marlowe first finds Carmen in Geiger's house, she's actually nude. Or mostly nude. I think she's nude. And then later she turns up in Marlowe's flat, in his bed, nude, ready to go. Whereas in the movie, she's just sitting in his chair, fully dressed, and he kicks her out quite quickly. But quite interesting that scene where she's there and he kicks her out was not in the 1954 version, but then ends up being put back in the 1946 version.
That's right. Yeah.
And which is, it's kind of like, I guess the original version had more Carmen in it, so it's interesting they cut that. But it's like they then probably thought, crap, we're losing so much Carmen, we got to put something, and that's
we've got to put something back in.
Yeah, that's easy. It's a disposable scene that we can put back in, I suppose.
Yeah, and another thing is, of course, that Geiger's running a porn racket in the book, isn't he?
Yes.
So,
which, of course, at the time is illegal. Pornography and stuff like that is illegal. But
was illegal. So, I mean, that is a big, it's a big blackmail business because he's blackmailing his clients. But, the production code couldn't have any of that either. So all that has to be. So this is one of the things we were talking about before, that they have to be subtle. So they sort of hint at it, but it's not always really clear.
Yes.
What exactly Geiger is up to. And Geiger is murdered by the chauffeur, Owen Taylor, but it's Geiger's lover in the book who kills Joe Brody, thinking that Brody killed Geiger.
Yeah.
And again, that happens in the film, but it's not made, that motive isn't strongly defined.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I liked Geiger, so that does weaken it. And that's all the production code and its Puritan streak.
Yes. Yeah. And well, I mean, I think whenever we revisit some of these older films, there's going to be a lot of that for sure.
Yeah.
Where things that could have gone farther don't get to go that far because of these insanely strict codes that are a little bit silly and more or less gone now, but there are still bizarre codes like
there are. But the production code was responsible for the ending as we have it, because there are a number of different endings. One involved Carmen faking a suicide or going to fake a suicide, but actually there's a real bullet in the gun, so she ends up killing herself. But it was the production code who said we'll have a final shootout and the gangsters kill each other. Sort of thing. Which obviously satisfies the production code because the bad guys get it in the end.
Exactly.
But it's a bit, that ending for me is a little bit too Hollywood.
I agree.
The ending of the book is much darker. It's much nastier. Marlowe at the end of the book says, I've just become part of the nastiness.
Yes. I missed that in the end. I missed that ending because I just thought that's such an important moment, I think, for Marlowe, because he is, a bit more wisecracking and stuff like that. But at the end of the book, it ends on a very downbeat, whereas this movie ends with he gets the girl and the bad guys die and it's happy. And I guess this sort of leads us into things we disliked then. Because one thing I really didn't like was the changing of Rusty Regan to Sean Regan. Why the name change? No sense in that. Nope. Why did they make? Because in the book, Rusty Regan is actually Vivian's husband, and he goes missing, and later Marlowe finds him dead. And if I'm not mistaken, it's Carmen who's killed him, right?
Carmen has killed him because he wouldn't go to bed with her.
Yes. So that's a whole plot element that is ejected from the movie that I thought, I don't know why you took that out, because that's important stuff.
It is important stuff. And it's also the key to the whole business at the end.
It is.
With Eddie Mars' wife, because he's meant to have run off with Regan.
Yep.
So that doesn't make any sense in the film.
No, and I can only imagine that if we're talking like stupid codes, I can only imagine the reason they didn't want to go that way is that would mean that Vivian is, an unfaithful wife. You know what I mean? Like, is that why they're doing this? To like keep her kind of boxed into.
It doesn't. It's never made any sense to me why they sideline the Regan character, because for a character who doesn't appear in the novel, he's absolutely vital.
Yes. Yes.
He's the key to the whole mystery.
Yes.
And not to have him there really does cause an issue for me. Because especially when the script is at great pains, to have more than one character say to Marlowe, "Why are you looking for Sean Regan?"
Yes.
And him saying, "Who says I am?" Well, the reason they're all worried about it in the book is that they think he's going to find out that he's dead.
Yes.
And they're all, it's all about Carmen. Well, there's no reason for that in the film.
Yes.
And then Carmen's guilt being sidelined, like I say, to a couple of lines.
Yeah.
It really is a weakness.
Because Vivian's whole plot in the book is I'm covering up my sister's sins to keep my family's name.
Yes.
And I think not having that in the film is absolutely to its detriment. It takes away the moral conundrum, the just that grittiness that the book lays down, that the Hollywood ending just is disappointing. The Hollywood ending disappoints me for sure.
And it works as a Hollywood ending. And I like the way that Marlowe maneuvers Mars into his own destruction. Yeah. But it's a cop-out ending, really, for me. And I think it's part of the reason why the film is so confusing, because you are told quite overtly that Regan is an important factor in all this. And then he is almost forgotten at the end. Yeah. Marlowe just says, well, Carmen killed him. That's a pretty important revelation, I think. Yes. It's all too blasé for me. And that's when it becomes more the Bogart Bacall vehicle, and the focus is getting them together on screen. Yes. Than actually telling the story. Yes. Because it would have been, if you're right, and I don't know if it is right, but if you're right to say that it was some sort of code thing that she couldn't be an unfaithful woman, the fact that the literary Vivian is doing everything she can and committing crimes essentially to protect her dad and the family name, is pretty virtuous. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's virtuous a little bit, I guess. I mean, her main thing is she doesn't want, if her family name is smeared, how does that affect them financially? So there's a financial stake. All that, but she's also doing it, I think, to say, well, I've got to protect Dad. Yeah, he was on his last legs. Yeah. So I think they could have, with a bit of judicious writing, they could have, because also they changed Vivian's surname. She doesn't even have Sternwood. She's called Rutledge. And it's like, okay, so the implication is that she had a husband. He probably died in the war. But it's a husband she doesn't need. Exactly. She could have just been Sternwood if they're not going to have. She had Regan. Yeah, her husband was Regan. He was already there. Well, yeah. She had Regan, but if they're going to cut that out, like, you could have just called her Sternwood. Like, I don't understand why you called her Rutledge, and then, like, what are you doing? What are you doing, Phil? That really doesn't work for me. It really doesn't work for me. I won't go so far as to say it spoils it, but it does jar. Yeah, definitely, and and I think this will tie into one of the questions we'll get to in just a minute, but. One of the other things I disliked ended up being Carmen Sternwood, because the film jeopardized her whole storyline for this favored Bacall Bogart love real life love story, Hollywood banking off of their their fame and their whatever. It made me not like her. It made me not like her character because there wasn't enough of Carmen to sink my teeth into. Like, I feel the momentary cab driver was more interesting as a character than Carmen. Yeah. And certainly Dorothy Malone's books up. Oh, good God. Amazing. That scene is another cracker. You're right. Carmen is sidelined too much. Yeah. And she, as a result, she doesn't make sense. Yes. And again, the cutting of the scenes doesn't help, because changing the whole Regan thing and cutting the scenes all contributes to dilute Carmen as a character. Yes. When really she's your killer. Yeah. But B, that is a major contribution to the reason the film as a plot doesn't make sense. It's all very well to say you have a good time and it's all about the style and it's all about the atmosphere and all the rest of it. But there is a plot there that can make sense.
Mm,
And they lose that focus. For me, they lose that focus
Definitely.
by concentrating too much on Bogart and Bacall
the real life romance.
reigniting and repeating the to have and have not
Yeah.
chemistry and star bankability.
Totally. Who was your favorite character?
Well, we've gone through this really. It's Marlowe.
Yeah, same. same.
For all the reasons we've said.
Yes, I agree. Who's your worst character?
The film is I love the film so much that I found doing things I don't like quite difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't a character that really stands out to me as being awful. But then I was reminded about Sid, who is Eddie Marsy's henchman.
Yes.
And he's the wide-eyed one.
Yes.
And he's so out of place. He's too comic. He says things like at Geiger's house. He says, "That's what he said. That's what the man said. That's what he said." And all this business.
Yes.
And it's all delivered like a comic turn.
Yes. He's very caricature villain.
I don't think he's threatening. I don't think so. When
let's get him, boss. Hey, come on, boss. Let's get him.
That's right. Yeah. And later on, he says to Marlowe, "How did you know that?" And he says, "He told me," pointing to the other henchman. And he goes, "He didn't tell you. He didn't tell you that. He didn't tell you anything." This idiot with the googly eyes is just a clown. And I can't bear. I just think in a film that hits so many good notes, he is a bum one.
Yeah, I agree. I almost put him, but I actually put Carmen. I put Carmen, and it's for the reasons I said, but also in addition to that, I think maybe if there were more scenes and she was fleshed out a little bit more, this would help. But the scenes that we do have are all her being too childish. Like she's too much of she's acting like a 12-year-old. It's very confusing. It's like, does she have some sort of I mean, obviously she's nuts because she's murdering people all over the place. But there's almost a sense of what's going on with her psychologically? Does she need serious? Obviously she needs help, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can get that. And
she's too juvenile at times. And
the scene that stops it for me is when she comes in with the gun. And she's quite cold and quite.
I love that scene.
That's an insight into what I suspect she originally was.
Yeah.
I suspect the character was more light and shade than we get.
Yeah.
I understand why you don't like her because she doesn't work. But no. I think the performance is good. I think she's really good, but she was probably better than we will ever know, really. Yeah,
it's the film. It's definitely the film's fault, or the filmmaker's fault for leaning into the real life love relationship between Bogart and Bacall.
Yeah, it is
at the expense of Vickers. It's like, well, you could have, because that. I mean, I admit that scene is a great scene. In Joe Brody's office or apartment where they, it's wonderful.
Great. She's too central to the whole story for me to dismiss her.
Well, she's too central to the book. The frustrating thing is she doesn't become central to the story. Because I watched this film with a friend of mine, and there was this part where you're sort of like, I kind of don't know what's going on, but I'm hooked on all the scenes.
Yeah,
and it's like
that's the best way to describe this film.
Yes, and I think that's the problem, because even with plot problems in The Big Sleep, the book, you still have an idea of what's going on and what Marlowe's after and why he's after it. There might be who killed this person? I'm not sure. Maybe this guy did it. Maybe not. There's things like that don't get tied up. But in the book, Vivian's place, Carmen's place, it, and that keeps it held together for me.
Absolutely. I would have liked to have seen the confrontation between Bogart and Martha Vickers.
Absolutely.
Because I think it would have been mesmerizing.
Yeah,
because it is in the book, and if they'd stuck to that ending of the book, I think it would have been amazing.
Yes,
but yeah, I get why you've put she's your worst. Definitely.
Yes. So okay, what is your favorite line?
I've always liked she tried to sit in my lap while I was still standing up. I've always liked that.
Yeah, Yeah, that's good.
And I've always liked it when he's tied up in the house at the garage, and he says, "You know what Canino will do when he comes back? He'll beat my teeth out and kick me in the stomach for mumbling." But I think I'm going to go for and General Sternwood. Orchids, nasty things. Their flesh is too much like the flesh of men, and their perfume has the rotten sweetness of corruption. I think that's great. But I'm going to go for Vivian saying, "I don't like your manners," and Marlowe saying, "I'm not crazy about yours. I didn't ask to see you. I don't mind if you don't like my manners. I don't like them myself. They're pretty bad. I grieve over them on long winter evenings. And I don't mind you ritzing me or drinking your lunch out of a bottle. But don't waste your time trying to cross-examine me."
I like that. No, I like that a lot.
I think that's a brilliant summary of Bogart's Marlowe.
Yeah,
definitely. And so I'm gonna go for that. But the film is littered with them.
Oh, it is. There is too many to choose, really. But for me, I got a couple, and one is, "How do you like your brandy in a glass?" I love that line. That's at the beginning of the movie. Yeah. Bloody love it. The other line I like is the for some reason the cab driver just really stood out to me in this movie. There's a woman cab driver, which is interesting because that is already like, that's kind of a glimpse of like war, because this film came out in 1946. That's, the war has been over for a bit, but you see these kind of war hangovers. And women were taking a lot of jobs that were traditionally done by men at the time. So having this female cab driver is really a result of the war, but it's also this kind of cool thing where it's like, oh god, watching it now, you're like, oh cool, there's a lady cab driver, and she's cracking the whole time. Yeah. Their chemistry for this like 5-second scene is great, but at the end where he's where he's like, oh, can I call you or something like that. And it was something like, what is it, day or night? And she's like, call me at night because I'm working during the day. And I'm like, that is such a suave line. Like, Marlowe, call that lady back. Forget Vivian. Call the cab driver. Yeah. Call the cab driver. God.
Yeah, and I'm glad you picked that, because it is easy to pick a Marlowe line.
Yes.
But and so it's good to give it to one of the minor characters.
And that has to be Lee. That has to be her.
That's Lee. Yeah, that's Lee.
For sure. Yeah. I'm just like, that has to be her. And
I think all the dialogue in the bookstore with Dorothy Malone is Lee Brackett.
What's your worst line?
Well, I was going to say anything that Sid says.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But I'm not. I'm gonna go with a Bacall line.
Okay.
Because I think it's just it taps into what we're saying about the ending being too Hollywood, and it just it makes me queasy every time I hear it. And she says, Bogart says, "What's wrong with you?" And she says, "Nothing you can't fix."
Yeah.
And I just think it falls badly flat.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just too sickly, and it's too. Yep. I mean, Chandler wouldn't say anything like that, would he?
No. William Faulkner would, though.
William Faulkner. Yeah. Well, I can't see Lee Brackett saying it.
No, I can't either.
It's just too. It's
either Faulkner or it's the other guy. What's his name?
The other fellow, yeah. It's too obviously
yes.
Come on, and it's just
a sleazy line. It's sleazy.
It's sleazy, and it's just cheap and cheesy, and I don't think it has any place.
Yeah, I agree with you. My least favorite line is at the end of the bookshop scene with the bookshop girl, where Marlowe says, "Thanks, pal," and pats her on the arm and walks out. I'm like, it's because it's almost like that whole scene is set up in a way that's like they're flirting. It's almost like they might have banged.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think they probably did, didn't they?
I mean, it's heavily implied. It's like
it is.
She's going to close. She closes the store. They go to the back. They start drinking. She fluffs her hair. She takes her glasses off. All that kind of stuff.
I don't like that. But when he says, "I'm just wondering if."
I was going to say that. Okay, yes.
You can't be attractive if you've got glasses on.
That was interesting. That was a weird thing for me because, yes, I didn't quite understand that scene. Why he made the comment about the glasses and then she took them off. And I thought it makes Marlowe a little bit of a sleaze.
It does make him a sleaze.
Kind of a jackass.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the most it's a one time in the movie he does something I just really didn't like at all, and I thought,
Yeah.
wow, what an asshole.
That has not aged well at all.
No. What would have worked is if she just did it herself.
Yes, absolutely.
If she just went over there, popped that thing off, took her glasses off, fluffed her hair while he's looking at something else, and then turned around and he's like,
"Oh, that would have been a character point because
yes,
she might feel herself unattractive in glasses.
Yes,
some people do. I never liked wearing glasses when I was younger. I had contacts for years, but she may have had something of that insecurity.
Yeah,
and that would have been quite an interesting character and a very economic way of presenting a character trait.
Yes.
But when Marlowe says, I can't give you one in the back room if you're wearing glasses, which essentially is what he's saying.
Yeah.
That is horrendous.
Yes. So and then for that scene to end with "Thanks, pal," those two things, I'm like,
and thanks for what?
Right? Because it's weird. Because then he gives a compliment like, "Hey, you would have been a good cop," because she's like really smart and really on it.
She is clever, and the fact that she knows that there can't possibly be a Ben-Hur 1860 with an erratum on page 116 or whatever.
Yeah,
because Ben-Hur wasn't written until 1880 or something.
Yeah.
The fact she knows that is superb and shows that she knows her job. I mean, it's a good little character sketch of a scene.
Yes.
But it is undermined by
those two moments, I think.
Marlowe's sort of seediness.
Yes. Yep. So I didn't like that.
I might have bought it more from Sam Spade. Would I have bought it more from Sam Spade?
Yeah, he's a sleazeball. He's a sleazeball in the book, so totally, and that works with his character. Yeah,
I've definitely bought it from.
Mike God, Hammer. Yes. We'll have to do some of his movies because boy, oh boy, there's probably lots. One of the
things I do, sort of, it makes me roll my eyes a little bit about this film is that every woman Marlowe comes across fancies him. And
yes.
Is Bogart that good looking a man?
He's not, but he's charming. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about this casting is he's not conventionally good looking, but he is very charming. And that, come on, that can win people. That can win a lady over.
I can certainly win a lady over where I am without it. But they fawn over him as if he's Connery's Bond, and it's an instant attraction. And I do find that a bit difficult to.
Yeah, that's probably playing more to Bogart than it is playing to Marlowe. Like Bogart's fame.
I think it's Hawks.
Yeah.
I think it's Hawks saying, everyone should fall over themselves to be in love with the leading man. Every woman should fall over themselves to be in love with the leading man. Yeah, and that, it just irritates me a little bit.
I totally agree. Let's because we'll wrap up with two more things: favorite scene and least favorite scene. What's your favorite? We've talked about a number, so it's probably one we've already mentioned. But what's your favorite scene?
I do like the Joe Brody apartment confrontation, and I like the way that when Harry Jones is murdered, I like the way that is photographed. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I like the darkness of the ending, the scenes at the end at the garage, and in the house.
Yes.
But I think for the sheer, it's like watching a well-directed play, and the way that the dialogue is firing off each other, and the way that there's so many characters in one room. I think I'll go for Brody's apartment.
Yeah, that is one of mine that I have here, but because you mentioned it, I'll pick another. And I do really like the scene in Marlowe's office with him and Vivian on the phone to the police.
Oh yes,
where he's like, "Why haven't you called the police?" And she's like, "Fine." So she calls, basically calls his bluff, calls the police, and then they just have the police going back and forth, passing the phone back and forth to each other, being like, "Oh, I didn't call the police. Well, here's my dad, or here's my brother, or here's it's a very fun, snappy scene. So that is one that I really, really liked.
Yeah, I better put you onto my mother.
Yeah, that's it.
And then she says, "My father should deal with this."
Yes.
All that's fabulous. Yeah.
What's your least favorite scene?
I don't think the scene where you mentioned before when Carmen's meant to be in his bed, that plays out a lot better in the book.
Yes.
And it's a bit of a flat scene because it doesn't really do anything.
Doesn't go anywhere.
The only its only saving grace is that, as in the book, Marlowe throws her out and won't be corrupted by her. It doesn't come alive like all the other scenes for me.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good one to pick. For me, it's the stupid sing-song moment in that sleazy bar.
Oh,
Lauren Bacall singing a song. I was like, what? It stops the movie in its tracks. It doesn't fit. It's so dumb.
I had a note about that.
Jeez, I hated that scene. I
meant to
hated
mention
that
it when
moment in that scene. In fact,
I
that
meant
whole
to mention
scene,
it
I
when we
think,
talked
was
about the score, because I was going to say I can well live without Bacall's musical interlude.
Yes,
That is dreadful.
I think that whole scene was not originally in it, and they did it as part of the rewrites when they reshoots rather.
I think you're right on that,
because it's a scene that really it doesn't happen in the book. It doesn't need to be there. It's just this extra scene to get them two together for a reason, and it's like, God. But the sing song.
Why can't you just go to the bar or the casino, whatever it is?
Yeah,
and she's there. Why does she have to be singing? I can't.
It's a very old Hollywood thing to me. That's like, okay, someone has to sing a stupid song for some reason. Like, hated that scene. But
why her?
Exactly. You could have had some lovely lady in the background singing a song, just in the having a singer. Like, that would have been great, I guess.
Yeah, if there was just a band, because I think in Murder My Sweet there's a little musical interlude, but it's a band in a club.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I can get that. I can get behind that. You know.
Not this.
But not that. No, I agree.
So we have a rating system of falcons. So if you're not aware, we're talking about the Maltese Falcon, which is the prized item that everyone is after in the book, the Maltese Falcon. Our ranking will be 4, out of 5. How many falcons are we going to give this movie?
Well, I'm giving it a solid 4. I almost want to give it a 4.5, but
interesting.
I think I'll stick with 4 because there are problems with it.
Yeah,
it's by no means a perfect film. But it's certainly a film that captures the very essence of what this podcast is meant to be about.
Definitely. I'm with you on that. It's a solid 4 for me. No more, no less. The problems are big enough to knock it down a peg. The sing-song stuff, what they've done with Carmen, that stuff really, really pulls it down for me. So it's a solid 4. It's definitely an important movie in the film noir genre. It's worth seeing. It's got cracking dialogue. If you want to study interesting dialogue on film that could work today just as much as it did back then, this film has a lot to offer and a lot to teach you. But
it's also got a lot to teach about how to adapt a book into a 2-hour movie.
Yes.
Both how to do it well and some pitfalls to avoid, as we've discussed.
Definitely. So
it's a very important film, and it's a film that anyone that's interested in film noir really, it should be in the collection somewhere.
Absolutely. Oh man, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we've put this one under our belt. The Big Sleep, everybody. The Big Sleep. We will be back next week with another film. Should we announce? Should we announce, or should we just let people be surprised on the day?
Should we let them be surprised on the day?
We'll let you be surprised on the day.
What's a film noir podcast without a bit of mystery?
Exactly. We'll leave you a clue, and it's a more contemporary film noir movie.
Yes,
that's the hint that you'll get. But we will see you guys next week.
See you next week, and thanks for tuning in.